For the last 3 weeks, 2 weeks, we have been interviewing a freedom fighter, Mr. Carl Matthews. As I go through the grocery store and various other places throughout the city, it amazes me that so few people know of the efforts of the sit-in movement in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. As a matter of fact, last night I was speaking to a man who saw bits of the program last week on Friday, the recorded time, and he acknowledged to me that he had no idea of a sit-in movement ever taking place in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He thought the only sit-in movement was in Greensboro, North Carolina. So I'd like to bring all my viewers up to date, those who have just come in, as well as those who have been watching the program for the last 2 weeks. Mr. Matthews is the leader of the first victorious sit-in march here in the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. It wasn't the first place of the march. Greensboro, North Carolina was the first place of the sit-in demonstrations in 1960. But Winston-Salem is the first place that victory occurred. And this history is documented in the libraries throughout the state of North Carolina, throughout the newspaper articles. And so the first week of our interview, we talked about Mr. Matthews finishing college in 1951, Johnson C. Smith coming home seeking to become a teacher in the school system, those experiences. And then we talked about the experiences with the Greyhound Bus Company. And then last week we ended the program, he was discussing his experiences at McLean Trucking Company. So we're going to take our discussion from that point, McLean Trucking Company. Good afternoon, brother. Thanks for coming.
How are you, my brother? It's good to be here with you again.
Oh, thanks for coming. We're honored to have your presence here. And the history is unknown. So I want you to discuss it in detail. And ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Matthews is going to be on as long as it takes for us to learn about the ground that we walk on in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Something very important. Let's start with McLean Trucking Company.
Okay, if I could for just a second.
Okay.
I would like to explain to many people out there what the sit-in movement was all about.
Okay.
There was a time in America when black people could not sit down in restaurants. We could not use hotels, we could not use motels. All the facilities in this country that were offered for Americans were denied to black people. Mm-hmm. In 1960, something happened in the minds and hearts of black youth, and we decided we were going to take our freedom. We were not going to ask for it, we were not going to beg for it. We were going to take it because we were entitled to it under the Constitution of the United States of America. This is when we went into stores and took seats and remained in these seats until the stores closed. And we did this for 107 days. There was a time when they roped up the counters to keep us out, but we continued to come because they had cooked their food up to serve the white patrons, and we closed the stores so that the food would rot if it had to. But they were not going to be able to serve it unless they served us. Mm-hmm. The sit-in movement victory of May 1960, I think it's important that people know this, was in fact the falling domino which triggered the chain reaction to breaking down the major barriers of segregation in the state of North Carolina and the United States of America. There would not have been a March on Washington if it had not been for the sit-in movement, because the army that marched on Washington came from the rank and file of the sit-in movement. We all know who the generals were, but the people who composed the rank and file came from the sit-in movement. There never would have been a Civil Rights Bill of 1964 had it not been for the army of the Civil Rights Movement standing over the government and standing behind the black generals who went to Washington. And there never would have been a voting rights bill if it had not been for the sit-in movement. Never before in the history of this nation has the adrenaline for freedom and the outcry for freedom reached such a peak by black people. I just wanted to say that at the beginning of this.
Well, let me, that's good that you started that. I did a research paper in high school, 1965, and they wanted me to highlight Martin Luther King. But I thought the sit-in movement at that time, that was 31 years ago, I was a senior in high school, I thought the sit-in movement was the motor, because that was something that I realized had the least amount of fear with it. You know, those other demonstrations, the ones they had in Alabama, people were getting attacked by dogs, water hoses, they were being beaten in the streets. But the sit-in movement impressed me at that time, at 18 years old, at that young age, to be the most forceful effort of the people at that time. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think it fueled the success of the civil rights movement, period. I think it really did. But what I'd like for you to discuss with us is those things that made you go alone, because you are not an ordinary person. You're not a common person. You're a special person. And people need to know the situations and circumstances that shape a great man, that spurned you to go alone for the first 3 days. I respect those who came behind you, but I have much more respect for your efforts, because we don't know if anyone would have made the same step. No one made it. You were the only one that made it. No one else made it.
Well, when
those four in Greensboro went together.
Pardon me.
Yes, sir.
Well, it wasn't intended to be that way. I knew from the time that I had heard about the 4 gentlemen in Greensboro sitting down, I knew from that moment that I would offer some support to them, that I would be a pinch hitter. I was very happy at the idea, and for the week that passed, much distress came my way. I started off with approximately 5 of my co-workers from McLean Trucking Company. Now, we had all discussed this on my first day back to work, and we were all in agreement that this should be done. But as the days passed and we got nearer to the time that the sit-in movement was going to take place in Winston, they began to come to me and say, hey, brother, you know, I discussed this with my wife and so forth, and, you know, so forth, and I don't think I'm going to be able to be with you. And this number trickled down until it got to be 1 person. And this gentleman says, I'm going to be with you come rain or shine, because we had always discussed the race situation and how we were degraded as human beings. And he says, I'm going to be with you. So we had planned, the two of us, to go in that morning. I didn't know what his plans were, but I knew what my plans were.
Now, you were discussing with me that during your time at McLean, you had participated in the membership of the NAACP, and that you had been given a position on the executive board. But you didn't tell them about it.
Well, there was a reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
I had begun to sell memberships to the NAACP because I wanted to do something to help in the freedom struggle. This is the only organization that I knew that was out front that was doing something. And I had two jobs. I worked at McLean's during the day, and at night, I walked the streets from door to door selling memberships. And after about a year passed, the lady called me into the office and she says, Carl, I want to tell you something. I said, we're very impressed. You sold more memberships than all of the other people combined. And we think we want to do something for you. So she suggested putting me on the executive board. And I said, I don't know anything about serving on the board, but we want you there because we can't afford to lose a person like you. So I became involved with the executive board. Mm-hmm. But during the period of the years, now I sold more memberships for 5 years than all of the other people who were out in the field selling memberships. She told me every so many months, you're on top again. But once I got inside the inner core of the executive board, I saw a lot of bickering, a lot of arguments. Nothing was completely settled without a great dispute. And I knew that if I went and told these people that I was going to town to sit down after hearing what I had heard in the executive board, I knew that I would be filled with negative attitudes, and I couldn't afford anything negative, not at that time. Everything that I wanted around me was positive, and if it wasn't positive, I pushed it away. So this is the reason that I didn't discuss, because I would have liked to have gone to the NAACP and presented my plan to them. But knowing what I knew, I was discouraged to do that. Mm-hmm. So it got down to one person that was supposed to meet me. And when I got down to the store, I had prayed all the way to town that God would just give me the wisdom, the knowledge, and the understanding to do what was in my heart to do. So when I got to town, the first person that I saw was a leading minister in town. And I says, oh, thank God he's put this man in my path to minister unto me. Mm-hmm. So I approached this gentleman, this minister, and told him my plans. I said, I plan to go into the store, and I need someone with your creditability to just look and see that I am going in here with peace and that I have made a purchase and that there's nothing unruly about my character. I just want to be served like any other American citizen is served, other than black people. And this man turned white in the face. And he says, I wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. I will have nothing whatsoever to do with this. And he hustled away from me, and he almost tripped over his own feet, getting away from me. And I felt so disillusioned inside. And as my mind began to think, I says, God, why? And I don't know, but the voice inside of me says, you haven't seen nothing yet. Mm-hmm. You haven't seen nothing yet. Mm-hmm. So this was the moment that I walked into the store, made my purchase, and took my key as to when a white person moved from his seat, I moved right in and I sat down. And everything is as if the world came to a standstill. white people begin to look around and to murmur, and I sit there. And black people began to peer from behind the aisles where they were, watching me, and I just sit there. And the two people on each side of me who had just been served their meal, they angrily got up and left their food there untouched. And all you could hear in the place was buzzing and murmuring. And I just sat because I knew that I'm going to be here until you take me out. I'm going to be here until you serve me. I'm going to be here until the store closes. And I'm going to be back, and I'm going to be back, and I'm going to be back again until I'm served. And that's the beginning of the sit-in movement. And that's just what happened.
So acting on it took all the pressure off, didn't it?
Yes, for a week.
Because your life experiences that caused you to grow stronger and stronger and stronger to have the strength to that point.
That's correct. And I was not
getting off the bus,
denied.
Not having the opportunity to speak up, being fired, not being acceptable. So the forces brought you to the point where you said, here I go.
That's right, and that was one culminating thing that happened to me. I had a friend in town.
You know, we have so few individuals in America, black Americans, and not one of them are acknowledged in our history books. You know, Rosa Parks had to get damn near killed before they acknowledged her strength.
I know.
Isn't that something?
I know.
That says a lot about the condition of the state of African Americans, colored people, black people, whatever they want to call themselves. That says a lot about our condition today.
Well, when we vote people into office and put them in a position to be our spokesman and in a position to be our leaders, when we find that these terrible flaws exist within them, we should vote them out of office. Let's put them in, and if they don't do the right thing, let's vote them out and put somebody else in. And let it be a continuation of putting in and taking out until we get somebody who represents the people. Not their family, not their friends, not their fraternity, not their loved ones, but the people. The people have the power.
But, Carl, I've been here 49 years. And just from my own personal history, black people reject the independent individual. We like people that will cater to us, that we can control. We don't like people who are straight with us.
Well, there's a reason for that.
What is the reason?
You know, when you attack the system, when you go against the grain,
Put fear in people.
yeah.
And
Anyone-
they don't feel losing their lives, they feel losing their
That's
job.
right. Yeah, if you attack the system, if you stand up against the system, you know, if you're inclined to tell the truth about sensitive matters, whether political or otherwise, hey, they will lock you up, they will lock you out, or they will kill you. You got three options if you stand up against the system, you know. Now you look at Mr. Mandela. He stood up against the system in Africa. They locked him up for 27 years. Carl Matthews stood up against the system in America, and they locked me out for 36 years, you know? And when they don't lock you up and they don't lock you out, they will kill you. You have three options. So this is why that people, they're not only afraid to speak out and to act out, but they're afraid to stand with those
Who
who do speak out
Yes,
and who do act out.
yes.
Yes, this is an incredible thing, but there are people.
But I'm saying swinging wildly for justice today, with the youth being in the quandary and quagmire of their false sense of identity. They're not responsible for their ignorance. They just didn't know. My students, they watching the program now. I'd like to say hello to them. They had no idea of your presence, your work. They had no idea of a sit-in movement. It seems as though we speak up after the horse has gotten out of the barn, when we feel as though it's safe and we can keep our jobs, you know. Now, 3 days, all by yourself. But you was rolling after the first day, weren't you?
Oh yes, I mean, hey, nothing would stop me.
You
know,
felt like
I
you
went back and I went back and I went back again and I went back. They arrested me, they took me to jail, and I went back and I went back and I went back again and again and again until the barriers of segregation had fallen. I went back until they served me.
Now, when you first saw the support of the people that we listed in the roll-in, and I hope some of those people are not present anymore, but when you first saw those people coming behind you, how did you feel?
Oh, I felt wonderful, because these were, Winston-Salem would not have attained the victory that we attained if it had not been for these people. Mm-hmm. Because the pressures were mounting on me, and I was going to continue to go back and do what I had to do until I dropped. But when these people came in, they were strong and they were dedicated and they were mean. And I don't mean mean.
Did they come from whence you perceived not? Were they people that you expected? You know, a lot of times we go through life and it's those whom we least expect. Was it like that?
Sure, because
those who you expected didn't show, did they?
In 107 days of marching and demonstrating, not one minister showed up to walk with us. Not one professional person, not one so-called educator, not one so-called leader. These people were just the salt of the earth that say we're willing to die for justice, freedom, and equality. And it's as simple as that. All the people who were
You on the executive board, NAACP. The first article I read, Elias Hodge, Reverend, said he had nothing to do with the effort. The NAACP had nothing to do with the effort. That's documented.
And I went out and begged them, please give us some support. Just say you're with us. And they say, we have nothing whatsoever to do with this effort. But when time for the money to be raised, they was raising money everywhere to help these poor students out in the street. And not one dime, not one penny came our way. We'll get into that.
So now, by the third day, you're still alone, right? Still?
Right.
The fourth day, 1 minute to go. Well, I guess I didn't receive any calls, but if I did receive any calls, I'm sure they were blocked. It was someone who may have not had something to say. Well, Teresa, hello. I hope you're watching the program. Those of you out in the viewing audience, I hope maybe you go to the library and document this history and further research the presence of a rejected stone, because you know today that's the stone that you're going to have to put in that corner if you're going to build some dedication for a better life.